Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. I'm going to summarize here briefly Sue Klebold's interview with Dr. Mark Goulston. And Sue Klebold was talking at that time in 1998. So 1 year before Dylan, with his friend Eric Harris, committed that murder-suicide at Columbine High School. He had stolen some electronic equipment from a van on a country road with Eric, and as young offenders who pretended to be sorry for what they had done and who had no previous criminal record, they were given these diversion classes, anger management courses, and they pretended to be sorry for what they had done, and they received undeservedly positive reviews from their diversion officers because they tricked them into believing that they were truly sorry for what they had done, that it hadn't been just an adolescent diversion incident. And then Dylan had hacked into the school's locker system because he was one of the most gifted computer users among the students at Columbine High School. And his action, like his misdemeanor, in addition to hacking into the locker system, was to leave a threatening note to the boyfriend of a girl in whom he had been interested. And then he was suspended briefly from the school, which in Sue Klebold's opinion was an overreaction and may have contributed, at least in a slight way, to Dylan's sense of not being loved, not being appreciated, and may have increased his desire to end his life and that of quite many others with his friend Eric. And then those disturbing essays that they wrote, truly dark subjects dealing with death, Satanism, and so forth. And at least one of their teachers did contact at least either the Harrises or Klebolds. And then Sue Klebold recalls asking or saying, "Dylan, you're scaring me," and then asking, "Do you think you need to see a counselor?" And I told the diversion people, "This has never happened. I've never had a kid get in trouble like this. Do you think he needs counseling?" And what was Dylan's response? "No, I don't think I do." And he continued, "I will prove to you that I don't need counseling. I'll prove it to you." Outwardly, Dylan did get back on track. He got his schoolwork back in order, and then he sent those college and university applications. However, in Sue Klebold's opinion, all this work to look normal and act normal, I really think it was taking a toll on him, and I think he was just working very hard to appear normal. And Dr. Goulston asked, "Do you think Dylan felt alone during that time?" Sue replied, "I think he felt completely alone." And this was amazing because Dylan, after all, had friends, especially Eric Harris. So, I mean, socially, he wasn't alone. But emotionally and spiritually, he felt alone. He had that void. To put it in Christian theological terms, he had a void because he didn't truly know God through Jesus Christ, while he, according to one of his internet biographies, did attend a Lutheran church and was even confirmed. It was just outward church attendance without any inward contents in it. And Sue continued. He was struggling in his head to behave right, do the right things. He was full of self-judgment, self-loathing, and I don't think anybody understood him. I don't think he really understood what was going on himself. And then Sorry, Dr. Goulston said or asked, say more about he's not feeling understood. Sue Klebold continued, my thought is that I just didn't listen enough. I think my guilt comes from taking to fill the spaces and not being quiet enough to just listen to what he was experiencing. We were very proud of the fact that at least one of our children was willing to go to college because the other one did not. And I think that put pressure on him. Maybe also my comment, the fact that he happened to be the younger of the Klebold's two sons, that maybe he felt it was a bit too much for him to be a role model for his older brother, who decided not to go to college. And so I think he picked that up, and when he didn't feel motivated or wasn't getting good grades or whatever happened, he just turned that around on himself. I think he just beat himself up with anything that he thought was our perception of him not meeting our expectations. Dr. Goulston, and what about the anger he felt towards the world? Sue, anything that we ever heard him experience, any anger were things that had happened to him in school. He felt the environment was very unfair, that the jocks and the high priority children in any incident would not get punished, but that the people around them would get blamed for things. Well, this is quite a common feeling among students. I think even here in the Philippines, some students feel that there are these privileged students who don't get punished for breaking the school's rules, but then the average students, or especially those who come from underprivileged families, get punished. He did talk a lot about that in the school, how the school was unfair, really perceived it to be unfair. He thought children were picking on him or bullying him. That one time when he scratched the locker and afterwards he perceived that these freshmen were pushing him around. Dr. Goulston, do you think Dylan might have been feeling hurt, pain and fear over and over again, plus injustice, and that there didn't seem to be any relief from it? And if so, do you think Dylan was suicidal before he was homicidal because he just wanted the pain to end? Sue, yes, I think that is very true. And some of this stuff, like in his journal we read after his death, he had also fantasized about this girl who he had a crush on, and she literally didn't even know him. She didn't know he existed. It wasn't real clear exactly what he was talking about, but he had this huge fantasy that if he could find love, everything would be fine. And indeed, in one of her videoed speeches about Dylan, or interviews about Dylan, was that Dylan did not feel loved, even though he was loved. And the tragedy, of course, from a Christian theological viewpoint, is if only there had been those enough love-filled Christians around Dylan, especially in the neighborhood where he lived. Not just outwardly decent people who may have gone to church without, however, being true believers, but these truly love-filled people, enough of them, who would have stirred in his heart a hunger and thirst for a true relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Maybe, just maybe, this tragedy could have been avoided. Maybe, just maybe, Dylan would have become a true believer, and maybe Eric would also have become. But this is speculation. Rachel Scott did show Christian love towards Eric and Dylan, even though they mocked her, probably also to her face. At least one of the scenes in that documentary film about Rachel Scott, although of course partly dramatized. I Am Not Ashamed. I think it was produced in 2016 and is still available on YouTube, I think for educational and then Christian evangelizing purposes. But in that film, there was that one scene when Eric and Dylan asked Rachel Scott for something, but then Rachel politely said that she couldn't talk with them because she had to go to her next lesson or something similar. And then they said, one of them said mockingly, "That's how you Christians always are," or something similar. And in one of those so-called basement tapes, videos that they filmed in, I think, Eric Harris's home's basement, they mocked Rachel Scott and possibly another Christian girl who attended Columbine High School. And indeed, Rachel's challenge program that was started shortly after this tragedy by her older sister, I can't remember her name, and then by her brother Craig Scott, whose main goal is to get these high school students, at least some of them, to commit themselves to showing love and caring and understanding, compassion and encouragement and comfort to those students who seem isolated, who seem ignored or even bullied by others, or isolated by others, or who seem isolated themselves. Because Rachel Scott wrote in her journal, maybe I should get the precise quote. So Rachel's Challenge is an organization in the United States that works to reduce violence. It is a non-religious, non-profit, non-political organization led by Rachel's father, Darrell Scott, and his wife, Sandy. And about a month before her murder, Rachel Scott wrote her code of ethics. Trying to get the okay. Finally, I found it on Wiki Quote, I think. Let's see. Okay. I'm sure that my codes of life may be very different from yours, but how do you know that trust, compassion, and beauty will not make this world a better place to be in and this life a better one to live? My codes may seem like a fantasy that can never be reached. Sorry. But test them for yourself and see the kind of effect they have in the lives of people around you. You just may start a chain reaction. Okay. Yes, finally. Rachel'sChallenge.org is trying to get the precise quote. Sorry. People will never know how far a little kindness can go. I want to reach out to those with special needs because they are often overlooked. I want to reach out to those who are new in school because they don't have any friends yet. And I want to reach out to those who are picked on or put down by others. Compassion is the greatest form of love humans have to offer. And still. Okay, finally the quote. I have this theory that if one person can go out of their way to show compassion, then it will start a chain reaction of the same. People will never know how far a little kindness can go. But let's get back at last to Beyond Columbine. It contrasted so deeply with Eric's writings. So this love fantasy that Dylan Klebold had, according to his surviving writings, some of them anyway, which just looked like madness, and anybody who looked at them couldn't help but think this was a very sick person. But in fact, Dylan Klebold was also hurting deeply inside. I always wonder what I could have said. The only thing I keep coming back to is listening and asking him something so he didn't perceive that he was alone. And that's what I keep beating myself about. Dr. Goulston, you know, it's interesting what you say about the sexual thing. A friend of mine is an expert in anti-terrorism, and he said that a high percentage of Americans who go over to ISIS are young men who have never held the hand of a girl. Sue, oh, tearful, how touching and how very true. So speak to what you are feeling and remembering right now. Sue, oh dear, I guess it started when you said that he wouldn't blame me, because I have this great sense of that I let him down, and that my own ignorance, because of my own ignorance, that he slipped through my fingers and I allowed him to die. And I've always had a great sense of wanting to apologize to him. But I know you are right, that if he were here, he'd say, Mom, it wasn't your fault. Dr. Goulston, do you think Columbine was a kind of a negative watershed event and that people before it didn't think angry or sullen teenagers would become violent? Sue, right. And I tried to, of course, explain that when people attacked me viciously, and I tried to defend myself. You know, how could you not know there were guns in your house? How could you not know this? We never had guns in our house, never thought my son would own one. Why should I be looking for them? It's like, do you have purple mushrooms in your house? Well, of course not. Dr. Goulston, a lot of parents don't believe awful things will happen to them. Was that true for you, Sue? It wasn't supposed to happen to me or mine, tearful. There was nothing in my life. Well, that's why I wanted to write a book, to say to people, be alert, be aware, because just because you love somebody and you think they are wonderful, that doesn't mean they are not struggling. Sorry. And then Dr. Goulston moved the discussion to the if only and plus what if questions. And Sue replied, if only I had known how to ask questions differently and listen differently would be right at the top of my list. If only the school system had been more sensitive to my son's needs and not tried to plug it into a punishment for a behavior that might have been indicative that he needed help. If only they had a better handle on a toxic school culture. If only they had had procedures in place when they saw Dylan's file and paper to examine whether or not he was troubled or whether this was just something that he wrote. If only when he'd had his doctor's appointment for a sore throat a couple of months before this happened. If only the doctor had done a psychological screening of somehow to say, hey, you've got some serious issues going on here besides throat. If only the whole diversion program was or had been different. If only knowing that a child who had never gotten in trouble was suddenly in trouble, and what a difficult, humiliating thing that was for him inside. If only they had been alert to the fact that he was at an elevated suicide risk and known how to advise me how to handle that and how to help him. And then later, Dr. Goulston asked, so some people didn't want you to write this book, Sue? To people who didn't want me to write this book is always the elephant in the living room. And at times, some people perceive me to be crazy to want to do it. But as I said, it was something I couldn't not do. It was like breathing. I couldn't, and I thought often about just dropping the whole idea, and I couldn't. And then Dr. Goulston, is there any other reason for writing this book, Sue? Yes, there's another reason. I know that there is the likelihood of there being another shooting. What I kept thinking is, for anyone who loves a child, if they have another issue such as Dylan had, I want them to know that they can get some help. Then Sue later said, I'm a joyful person. I have a tremendous amount of gratitude. I love my life. I feel that everything that's happened to me in a bizarre way has been a gift. So I don't feel like I have some kind of complicated grief, but I never returned to joy. Sorry. I feel that I've passed through a mirror and I'm living in a world very different from the one I knew before. And then later on towards the end, we have got to do a better job with screening, diagnosis, treatment, follow-up, aftercare when you leave hospitalization. We really have a broken system, and there are so many things. Here's where there are things that I wish would happen, and we can't even make this happen in our own state. I think that suicide prevention education and awareness should be part of every curriculum where you work with people. It should be part of educators' curricula. People in healthcare should have that. I know in our own state, we're trying to get this law to try to require counselors and psychiatrists to have at least a certain amount of suicide prevention training. And we can't even get that passed here, even though we are in the top 10 on the suicide rates. I would think by now, 17 years later, the interview was done in 2016, I could become desensitized to that, but I'm always speaking to that hidden critic, always sensing that whatever I say, it's like a Rubik's Cube. I have to look at it, well, somebody who hates me will look at it this way or this way or this way. I'm certainly guarded and careful, and to what extent I'm holding back or trying to protect myself, it's very much there. I can't imagine living without it. If you're a parent reading this, I have one request. If you have a moody child of any age or maybe early teens or older, I would like you to go to that child and say, what is something that nobody in the world understands about you that causes you fear, pain, or anger? And then whenever they say, whatever they say, let them finish and let them say to them, tell me more. Dr. Goulston, let's hope this saves lives. Sue, that's what this is all about, isn't it? Dr. Goulston, take good care, Sue. And then Sue answered, thank you, I'll do my best.